Welcome to Just WannaQuilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and, of course, a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. This is Elizabeth Townsend Guard. I'm a law professor at Tulane University Law School, and I have two faculty fellows, one at the Business School for Entrepreneurship, the LePage Faculty Fellow at the A.B. Friedman School of Business, and one for Narrativity in Fiber and Gender at the Newcomb Institute, which is the Greenbaum Fellowship. And I just want to quilt. So today we're talking with Reed Johnson. He is one of our featured designers on our inventory quilt project, which is insanely great. So go to our Facebook page, which is JWQ Inventory Quilts, and we are a group, a growing group of people that are using our stash to create all kinds of quilts throughout the spring and however long we want to do it. And we've invited a bunch of designers to come and play with us, where they are also using their own patterns to look at their stash differently and to inventory what they have. So Reed Johnson's part of this, and we talked to him about all kinds of things.
My name is Reed Johnson from Blue Bear Quilts, and I am calling from Largo, Florida.
Nice. Where's Largo, Florida?
Largo would be one of the suburbs in the Tampa metropolitan area.
Got it. Interesting. Cool. And what's your first memory of someone sewing or quilting in your life?
It would be my mother, but she is not a quilter and not really a sewer. When I was about 5 years old, she made me a quilt. It was made out of, I believe, 30s reproduction fabrics, and they're large squares that were sewn together, and then she tied the whole quilt with yarn.
Ah, nice. Do you still have it?
I do still have it, yep.
So interesting,
isn't it? It really made me, looking back on it now, it makes me aware of how special those gifts are when someone, takes the time to make a quilt for you and gives it to you as a gift.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? We don't do enough to talk with the people that we give the gifts to. So interesting.
No. And some people don't appreciate quilts as a gift. Like my mother, although she really enjoys looking at my quilts, I don't know that she necessarily wants one because she's not one of those people that appreciates quilts.
It's interesting. And how do you know? I mean, that's my biggest worry, Not my biggest worry. It's a very tiny worry. But I feel like if I'm going to make a huge quilt and give it to somebody, I want them to appreciate it. And there's no telling whether they will or not unless you know them really well,
That's absolutely correct. And sometimes you do that. You work on a great big huge project and give it to somebody, and then later you find out that it was turned into a dog bed or
right. Right, exactly. You're like, oh man, that's a lot of hours I can't get back. When I'm glad your dog likes it. Oh,
so
goodness.
you have to do it out of love and let them choose to do whatever they want.
Oh my God, you sound like my mother. My mother used to say that about my sister, because my sister and I'm like super like, I've always been like, oh, you can have everything, anything I have is yours, right? To pretty much everybody, and just kind of like everybody should be kind and give things to people and all that. And my sister's not that way. So my mother would always be like, you have to give it to the goodness of your heart. You can't expect something back. And I'm like, yeah, I expect kindness back. Like, I did not like that answer at all. I just thought like, I want to make the rules and everybody has to be nice and everybody has to share.
That's hard, isn't it?
It's
hard
really
to give
hard.
it away.
Really, seriously. I don't want this to turn into a therapy session, but man, it's really hard when you have very different feelings about objects or things, like I don't really covet things.
You're like, do you know how much work I put into that, and you absolutely don't care about it at all?
Right, give it back. Right. Right, it's a conditional gift. If you're going to love it, I will give it to you. But if not, I'm taking it back.
Right. And I think that's okay to say to somebody.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm giving this to you, but if for whatever reason you don't really appreciate it, I put a lot of work into it, so rather than give it to, some type of a thrift shop, please give it back to me,
Right. I don't know. It's all very strange. We live in a very strange world, I think. All right. So tell me a little bit about Blue Bear Quilts and what you do and who you are and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, I was an attorney for 35 years.
I saw that. Interesting.
And it wasn't in patents and trademarks. It was auto accidents.
Wow.
So when you see those TV attorneys, I was always on the other side of them.
You were on the other side, meaning who were you working for?
Insurance companies.
For insurance companies, right.
Right, yep.
Yeah.
And so that was a good job, but it wasn't creative.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
And so every year I go to the state fair and I would look at the beautiful quilts, that they display and the blue ribbons. And I wanted to purchase one of those. And so I found out how much it would cost to purchase one. And so I said, I need to find out how to make those.
Totally. You're like, there's no way. That's funny.
Yeah. So I started learning how to make them and did that basically as a hobby while I was an attorney.
Uh-huh.
And then when I was 59 years old, corporations sometimes do these things where they want to get rid of the, older, higher paid workers.
Right.
And they make your life miserable. And that happened. And so I decided I need to find something else to do. And I decided to become a quilt designer.
That's so interesting. And
the name Blue Bear came from a blue fuzzy bear that I made in a quilt shop class. Uh-huh. I entered him in the Florida State Fair and he won a blue ribbon. So he became the mascot. He's my boss and he is a tough taskmaster.
I understand. I get that. That's interesting. And then tell me now sort of what your life is like. Are you full-time doing this? Are you part-time? Sort of what role does this play in your life?
No, I do it full-time.
Interesting.
I design patterns for my own company, Blue Bear Quilts. Uh-huh. I design patterns for fabric companies like QT Fabrics, Timeless Treasures, Clothworks. I design patterns for AccuQuilt. Uh-huh. And then I also teach classes on various patterns, Quilt in a Day patterns. I'm a certified Quilt in a Day instructor.
Great. I want to talk about that.
And then also I also teach electric quilts because I've become fairly proficient at that.
Oh, very cool. That's cool. Love it. Okay, so tell me a little bit about, so can you make a living doing this? Like, that is always the question people ask. Like, can you cobble together enough things to have a lifestyle that you want?
Well, I'll be honest, I don't make the same amount I made as an attorney.
Yeah.
But you definitely can make a living. I think when you're getting started, you either need to have, a fair amount of savings in order to, meet your monthly bills or have, a partner that's going to, be able to pay the bills. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a ramp up process. I don't think you start out immediately making money, but as you get better and more proficient at it and start doing more and more things, I think you see your income start to increase, over time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's such an interesting kind of it's like little bits of income. I think that's true of pretty much anyone who's kind of an entrepreneur at this point, that the income streams have to come in from different places. And it's just kind
Absolutely.
Of keeping them all moving.
Yep.
All right. So I want to know, so we are, so I'm trying to get up streaming. We're trying to do some streaming videos. Streaming. So I've been spending the last 48 hours learning streaming software, which is just the nightmare. But it's getting there. Tell me how you feel about EQ8 and sort of your process of learning EQ8. Are you there?
Unfortunately, it cut out, so I did not hear your question.
Sorry. Okay. Hold on just a second. Let me just make sure okay. So I was saying I was learning new software, and it's kind of a struggle. And I'm curious about your journey with EQ8. We have EQ8, and we've worked on it a little bit, but I haven't fallen in love. So I'm curious sort of what your process was for getting into EQ8.
Well, I started it when it was EQ4.
Nice.
So that was 4 versions of the software. And I've been, as a hobby, probably like playing around and learning on it for probably about 20 years.
Yeah.
And in the time, Electric Quilt, the company has like some awesome books that you can buy. Like there's EQ8 for beginners, which is awesome. And if you basically followed the lessons in that book, I think at the end of the book, you would be fairly proficient in using the software.
Oh, that's good to know.
There are also a lot of, if you go to the Electric Quilt website, there are a lot of tutorials that they have for free on the website that will show you how to do different things. And so I've spent a lot of time watching those. And there's also Carrie Schell does On Point Quilter, and she's written some of the Electric Quilt books. And she has a Facebook group called On Point Quilter, and she teaches through lessons, how to do the various things in Electric Quilt. And I've been a participant of that for a couple of years, and that's been very helpful.
Interesting. Very interesting. And do you feel like EQ8 is like a key tool for pattern designers? You're one of our pattern designers for our inventory quilt project, and we're super psyched that you're part of that. Do you feel like EQ8 is a professional tool as well as a hobby tool?
Absolutely. It's definitely designed for both. I use it professionally because you can get all of the things that you need to create a pattern. You can get the yardage measurements. You can actually create JPEG photos of, like what the blocks look like and the pieces look like. And then through a meta file, you can break the blocks apart, and that helps you create, the shapes that you need to put in patterns. And for the hobbyist, not everybody is interested in designing quilts. So, why would they be interested in Electric Quilt? It's because they can do things that would be very helpful to them. Like if you happen to design a quilt, you can print out the yardage, so you would know exactly how much fabric to go in the store and buy. If there's a pattern that you like, but you don't necessarily like the fabrics that they put in it, you could take and create the quilt on your computer, and then you can go to the various fabric websites, like Moda or QT Fabrics, and actually download the JPEG files, the pictures of the fabric, and then actually put them into your quilt. So you would see what your quilt looks like before you ever have to cut any fabric. And then you would be able to print out the exact yardage that you would need. So you could also change the size. Like let's say the quilt is a baby quilt, but you want to make it king size, you'd be able to add additional blocks to your quilt and then get the measurements and the yardage that you would need to make it a larger quilt. So it definitely has a lot of applicability for the hobbyist as well as the designer.
Very interesting. And it's so interesting. Like I find with EQ8 that I get kind of sucked into making stuff. Like I make lots of different ones. I haven't crossed the line and made the quilt yet, but it also feels like it's kind of like a video game. And like if you're tired and you can't quilt, you can always go play in EQ8. Do you feel like that too?
Yes, it's like a coloring book.
Yeah,
because you can sit there and design a quilt on the computer and then start coloring it in. And I'll be honest, there have been some where I make them and they're so complicated that I say, I'm never sewing them.
Make it. Never.
It's
we
beautiful, but it's just not going to happen.
It's not going to happen, right. And we saw this last week a little bit of a brouhaha over Pattern Jam. Did you follow that? Pattern Jam.
I saw there was something about it, but I wasn't sure what it was all about.
So Pattern Jam is this like online free online quilt pattern designer stuff, and you can make the blocks. It's kind of like EQ8 really light. It's very simple, but what people were doing was taking patterns from pattern makers and reproducing them in Pattern Jam, and that became like this whole big brouhaha, and Pattern Jam apologized, and like all this stuff happened. So I'm curious how you feel, how protective you feel about your patterns. And since you've made them in EQ8, there's some degree of creativity, but it's also using traditional blocks. I mean, you're putting time into it, don't get me wrong, but the building blocks are coming from the software. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about your how much is yours, how much can other people make a copy of it, that kind of stuff.
Well, with a lot of quilt designs, it's basically putting shapes together, squares and triangles and diamonds, and there's really nothing protected about those shapes. So right. The way you put the shapes together, I don't know that you can necessarily say that that's yours unique, but what becomes unique is when you write the pattern and your instructions, that's unique. And so I think if somebody were to take one of my patterns and put it into EQ8 and then change it around or, color it however they choose, that's their choice. It's their quilt. They can make it the way they want. But if they were to basically reproduce the same thing and then put out a pattern that was very similar to mine, then I would probably say that they were infringing on my work.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that does. And have you had that experience? How has your career been in terms of, has it been okay? Do you feel like people have copied your stuff? Like, have you had any experiences like that?
I'm not aware of anywhere like somebody has like copied it and, tried to start selling. I've seen where people have taken my patterns and gone further and made their own quilts, but they're making them, for their own personal use. And I don't have any problem with that.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. So, tell me a little bit about, Quilt in a Day.
Well, where I was first exposed to Quilt in a Day was when I wanted to start sewing, as a hobby, as an attorney. I went to a local sewing store and said, I'd like to learn how to make quilts. And they said, well, the Quilt in a Day log cabin pattern is a very good one for beginners. So that was the very first quilt that I ever made.
Nice.
And it was a good pattern for a beginner. And then many, many years ago on public TV, PBS, Eleanor Burns and Quilt in a Day had a TV show, and I used to watch that all the time. I mean, many years I watched that program and absolutely fell in love with her. Well, then when I decided to become a professional quilt designer, I knew that I also would have to be able to teach classes. So I was looking online for, becoming a certified instructor, and I happened to come across that Quilt in a Day was offering that type of a program. So 4 years ago, I went to Paducah. They offer it both in Paducah and California, and became a certified Quilt in a Day instructor.
And tell me tell me more about becoming a certified instructor. Do you find it matters, or how is it different than just taking a class?
Well, it's very intense. So you went to Paducah for a week, and they were long days. They probably were like 8 to 10-hour days. And basically, you went through, it probably wasn't every pattern, but a lot of patterns that Quilt in a Day has. And you actually used the rulers and the templates that they have and made samples of the different patterns that they have. And then they also showed you their methods for how they would teach a class. So it was almost the same as if Eleanor was teaching the class. And so they have you make mock-ups of the quilt pattern, and you start with, you're going to sew these two shapes together, and then you're going to sew these two, and then you're going to cut this. And so it's all laid out in steps of how you would go about, making this pattern. And it's a very good method. And so it's almost like learning how to be a quilt instructor.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. Sounds fun. Sounds like a lot of fun. And do you find that people
it was fun.
like you to teach that class?
It is popular to hire me to do a Quilt in a Day pattern. Absolutely. And I entered the AccuQuilt block design contest 3 years in a row and won different versions of it. And the first year, I won the fan favorite, and my prize was to get to spend a week with Eleanor at her fall retreat that she has in Julian, California. And so
Really?
that was extremely special to be able to spend that time with her. And what you see on TV and in the videos, that's her. It's not a put on. I mean, I don't think the woman has a bad day ever. She's just fantastic, and I love being around her.
And do you think that that's really interesting? We haven't interviewed her. I would love to interview her. There's like a few that we've done like 300 interviews in 2 years, and there's a few that were sort of outstanding, kind of our dream team. Do you feel like
I'm sure that she would do it.
Yeah,
I'm
I should
pretty
reach out
sure
to her.
she would do it. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I've been shy, so there's a few of them I'm just shy
No,
still about.
don't be shy. She'll do it.
Yeah. So, do you feel like what role do you think she plays and that generation plays in our quilting world? Because there really were like trailblazers in a lot of ways, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And she is indeed a trailblazer. I mean, they kind of call her the grande dame of quilting, and I think she is.
Yeah.
She was a trailblazer. Well, her story is a very interesting one, and I'll let her actually tell it. But part of it is that she was responsible for her two sons, and they lived near a pants factory. And in the pants factory, they used strips of fabric to make the waistbands. And for some reason, they threw a lot of those away. So she and her sons would go dumpster diving, and they would retrieve these strips of fabric from the dumpster. And then she wanted to learn to make something with those strips. And so that's where she came up with the whole idea of putting strips together and then subcutting them and making different things. And that whole stripper routine that she has, that's where that came from.
It's amazing, isn't it? So amazing.
So I almost think in some ways she was kind of responsible for rotary cutters and rulers, with that whole strip thing, because that was new. Nobody had ever done that before.
Yeah. It was such an innovative time. It's really interesting. So interesting. All right, tell me about, so AccuQuilt is one of our sponsors for this inventory quilt project, and they're super nice. I knew nothing about, I had used one once, but I hadn't really used it the same in the way you should be using it. And I've fallen kind of in love. I kind of am amazed at how fast, like cutting used to take forever, and now it doesn't. And it's precise, and it's fun to sew, and you know that if it's not working, it's because your 1/4 inch seam is off. Tell me a little bit more about your relationship with AccuQuilt and how you feel about them.
So how I got started with AccuQuilt was initially when I thought about being a quilt designer, I wanted to make kits. And so some of the things that you're mentioning, I would have to have, pieces that were cut out accurately, and you'd need to be able to do that quickly if you're making kits. So I bought, an AccuQuilt and the cutter and some dies, and their motto is better cuts make better quilts.
Yeah.
And no matter how careful I was, as a young quilter, no matter how careful I was with a rotary cutter and a ruler, it still was hard to get accurate cuts. And if you're off by as much as 1/8 of an inch when you're making something larger, it really starts to show up and you notice it. So I did experience it by using their cutter and the dies, that I did get better cuts, and it did indeed, make better quilts because the pieces line up perfectly. And when you're sewing, half square triangles, for example, they have unusual angles on the pieces that are cut out, so there's no dog ears. So if you sew like a perfect 1/4 inch, you're going to get a piece that measures exactly what it's supposed to measure. And then after that, I noticed that they had this design contest, and I thought, well, that would be good, to enter something like that if you're going to be a designer.
Right.
And the first year I was the fan favorite, and then the second year, which would have been 2017, I was the grand champion, and that's where they put your block design up on a billboard outside their building, and it's there for a whole year.
Wow.
They have this big event, and there's a famous quilter there, and that particular year it was Mary Ann Pons.
Yeah.
It was such a treat to be able to meet her.
Yeah.
And then the year after that, I entered again, and I was the runner-up, and that year they put your block in a great big huge thing inside the building for a year.
Very cool.
So that gave me a little bit of credibility, as a designer, having won the contest in some form for 3 years in a row. And then I started designing patterns for AccuQuilt. And so many of the free patterns that you see on their website, some of those have been designed by me.
Very cool. I love it. And so it became a professional relationship through the contest.
Exactly.
Very cool. And would you recommend that to others, that that's an interesting way to get into the business, is to do these, make your name by, being known from the contest?
Yeah, I think that you have to get credibility, and one way is, through education, like I did with the certified instructor program, and then another way is getting your name out there through contests. So I think any contests that are available that people can enter, it's definitely a way to, kind of promote yourself and promote your business.
Yeah, very interesting. Tell me a little bit about the embroidery designs at AccuQuilt, because you have some of those on your patterns sometimes. Tell me a little bit more about them. I'm really curious.
So obviously a lot of people would think, oh, I can cut out squares or I can cut out rectangles.
Right.
And they probably can cut those out fairly proficiently, but things that are very hard to cut out would be the different applique shapes. So if you're, cutting out a bear or a duck or a sailboat, those probably are a little bit more challenging to cut out. And so when you use an AccuQuilt die, you can actually put the fusible webbing on the back of your fabric first, and then put it on the die and cut it out. And so then it's all ready to go. Mm-hmm. And it's a perfectly cut shape. And now AccuQuilt, I believe for the majority of their applique shapes, provides a free download of the embroidery files for all the different types of sewing machines. So if you have, one of those more modern sewing machines that allows you to do embroidery, they provide the files so that it'll automatically embroider around the shape for you, which is wonderful.
Very interesting. And then do you need the die to go with the embroidery set? Is that how it works?
Yeah, you purchase the die, and then when you've purchased the die, there are free patterns that you can download from their website, and then you also can download the embroidery files for free. Got it.
All right, so my biggest question to you is, okay, we've got like the 8-inch block, I think 4-inch block, 6-inch. I don't know. We have I'm now confused as to what we have. We have a beginning set. I think it's an 8-inch block set. How do you just buy all of the different sets? Like, how do you know, I feel like I'm confused on how to be ready to be prepared to use it for whatever quilt I'm using it for.
Well, this is where electric quilt can also come in handy in combination with AccuQuilt. So when you, I think what you're talking about is an 8-inch cube.
Yes,
it's a box and it has all these different dies in it.
Yeah.
So it's an 8-inch cube. So if you go onto the AccuQuilt website and search for 8-inch patterns, they have like a little pamphlet that you can download as a PDF. And I forget how many different blocks it has in it, but it's either like 72 or 144, something like that. And it shows you all the different blocks that you can make with that particular cube. So in other words, taking those shapes, you can make all of these blocks and they'll be 8-inch blocks. So then if you know what blocks you want to use, you then take and put those in the computer as electric quilt and design a quilt. And then you know that the shapes,
really cool.
That you have will definitely cut out the right size piece.
All right,
so that's a really good thing to combine the two together.
All right, that's so insanely interesting. Okay, so can you do it the other way? If you found something that's like a 10-inch cube thing, could you shrink it so that it would be for 8-inch, or is it doesn't go that way?
Yes, you could. So if you found a pattern that you like and it's a 10-inch block and you have the same pieces in your 8-inch block, which most cubes have the same pieces. So whatever pieces are in an 8-inch cube, the same pieces are in a 10-inch cube. So you would just put it in electric quilt, and you actually just have to go to one little box where it says like the size of the block, and where it says 10, you change it to 8, and voila,
wow.
your pattern is instantly changed to an 8-inch block. and you'd be able to print out the yardage that you would need to create that quilt.
That is incredible.
It's that easy.
Seriously.
It's that easy.
That's amazing. It's really amazing. Now, do you design your patterns so that they will work in AccuQuilt? Are you cognizant of that as you're designing?
Yes. So I oftentimes will think of what AccuQuilt shapes do I have, and being a designer for them, I do have quite a few. But so I think about what ones I have, and then I make sure that I have them before I start designing the quilt, because when I'm making it, I want to be able to cut out the pieces quickly and easily and accurately. So even like as I'm participating in the Bright Hope inventory quilt project, you'll notice on my Instagram that I'm cutting out the pieces on AccuQuilt.
So cool. Very cool. Well, this is so insanely awesome. Seriously, I'm excited that you're part of our inventory. Now, tell me more about other things that you do. Like, how important is it to volunteer and be part of blog hops and weird projects like ours? Like, how important is that to get your name out and be part of these kinds of things?
I think it's extremely important because if you're not involved in things and you're not participating, people don't really know that you're out there.
Yeah.
So an example would be, talking at a quilt guild. I recently did that in Boca Raton, and I would probably say the majority of the quilters there weren't that familiar with me, but through hearing my story and seeing my presentation, they found things, that I'm involved in that they liked. And so I made that many more new friends, by participating in that. Yeah. And so I would say that the same would be true of like the inventory quilt project, that people that have no idea of me are going to find out and say, wow, I really like that, or no, I don't care for it that much. But it's an interesting way to get out there and meet new people.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm super excited about all of it. I think it's going to be amazing. Now, when you design for AccuQuilt and you're doing these free patterns, they're not naming you. Are you you're an employee or an independent contractor, but you don't get named as the pattern designer. Is that right?
Yeah, no, they don't actually put that you designed them. So if you go on my website, you can see the ones that I've designed.
Yeah. You can match it up. Is that kind of what you're saying?
In other words, I talk about them and I show, here's another pattern that I designed for AccuQuilt.
Right.
So through the process of watching me on my website, you'll see which ones I've designed.
Yeah, very cool. Interesting. Very interesting. Well, I'm so excited about all of this. I can't wait to... Now, half square triangles are my bane of my existence. And your pattern that we're doing, which pattern did you send? The Bright, is it?
Bright Hope.
Yeah, Bright Hope. How scared should I be of your pattern? That would be my first question.
Well, are you going to use AccuQuilt to cut out the pieces?
Yes, I am. I'm going to.
Okay. Then you don't need to be scared at all, because those half square triangles are going to match up perfectly. Mm-hmm. And here's a little pointer for you on sewing, because oftentimes people are like, well, I don't know if I'm getting a perfect quarter inch. So on those half square triangles, when they're cut out with AccuQuilt, you'll notice that there's a point on both ends, like where the dog ears would be.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe, over the phone like this.
Yeah.
But there's a weird little point on both sides of the triangle where you sew. And when you start sewing, if you enter right on that point and then sew an even quarter inch along and exit out that point, you will have a perfect quarter inch.
Okay. I'm going to try it. If not, I'm going to make you come to the house and show me how to do it. It's so funny because, as I said, we're starting the streaming stuff, and what it allows you to do, you can also add Skype in. So I'm so about, I think we want to set it up so, when we are doing something, I can be like, it's not working. So make the designer come and be like, okay, why is it not working? So I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good idea, because that's oftentimes, you'll hear people having trouble doing something or experiencing it, and trying to explain it, via email or over the phone. It's really, really hard. But I agree with you. Like a video or Skype would be like immediate feedback to say, oh, I see what you're doing wrong. You're doing this, and this is what you need to do instead.
Exactly. So we'll see how it goes, but it makes me laugh because I'm like, the more I learn about the streaming videos, I'm like, okay, so I could have someone like see what I'm doing and like help me. Like, I want that. Ridiculous. And people always are like, you've done a podcast on quilting? Like, isn't that kind of a weird thing? There's no video. Yes. Well, life is complicated. So, well, I cannot wait. I'm trying to try each pattern just a little bit. So I can't wait to sort of experience it. Do you have any questions for me or issues that arise with I imagine with your contracts? Tell me a little bit about the AccuQuilt contract. When you design for them, I mean, you're getting paid for the design, even though it's free to us, but are you signing over your rights, or are you also allowed to sell it?
No, you basically have to sign over the rights to the pattern to them. So you're an independent contractor. You get paid for creating the pattern and for sewing a sample, but the design does become permanently theirs.
Really? Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then can you make derivative work? Can you make ones that look kind of like it, or are you precluded from that too?
I think I could probably make things that are variations of it.
Mm-hmm.
As long as it's not exactly the same pattern, I think I would probably be all right.
And how
but it would have to look different. I think it couldn't really look that similar.
And how do you decide which one you're going to how does that process happen? Do you make a quilt? Do you because you work with them so much, do you propose a quilt? Sort of and how do you decide what's going to be yours on your website and what you're going to do for AccuQuilt?
Well, the way it works when I'm doing it for AccuQuilt is they'll email me and tell me about a new die that's coming out, and then they'll send me pictures of the die, and then they'll say, please create some projects with this die. And then you submit the projects, and then they pick the ones that they like, and then they send me the die so that I'm able to actually make a sample.
Very cool. And
so basically, they tell you about a new one that's coming out ahead of time.
Yeah, very cool. I have the glorified 9-patch. I'm kind of in love with it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really fun because it's like curvy but not hard. So,
not hard at all.
No, not hard at all.
You'd be amazed how easy it is to sew curved pieces together.
I know, it's weird, right? People think it's all really hard, and it's not, especially with their system. The notches help a lot.
What's so funny is that you're telling me that the bane of your existence is half square triangles, and you like curve piecing.
I do. I like curve piecing. Yeah, the ones that really get me are flying geese. Man, I can't. No matter what I do, they just look weird. I've tried them every way. Something. I think it's psychological that when I see a geese, I just lose it. So
you can do it. I know you can.
Yeah, you don't know. See, this is why we need to Skype, because you're going to be like, yeah, you can't do it. Like, don't do any more geese. Craziness. Well, I adore talking to you, and I can't wait to try your pattern. And anything else before we end? We went a little over. We did good.
Two other exciting things that are happening.
Oh, right. I forgot.
The spring market, I'll be having a new fabric line that's debuting with QT Fabrics. It's a collaboration I did with them.
Fabulous.
And it's going to be fabric that's inspired from the 1920s.
Oh, nice. Oh, you got to come on and talk about that again. Yeah, that's so cool.
That'll be kind of cool.
Where did you get the inspired stuff from? Did you look at fabric from the 1920s and then design your own version?
So it's really interesting. QT Fabrics is actually the oldest fabric company in the United States. They've been around since the early 1800s.
Wow.
And so what I did was I went on the internet and looked for things, patterns that I liked that were from the 1920s, and pictures of things from the 1920s. And then they took those and actually went into their archive and looked for similar fabrics to like what I was picking out.
Oh my gosh.
And then we then we use those fabrics as like the baseline of things, and we maybe combine certain elements of them and change the colors so that the colors might be a little bit more modern.
Yeah.
But it was a really, really fun process.
That sounds great. Can you sign up
and
again
then the
and
other
let's
thing
talk
that I'm
more
really
about
excited
that
about
project?
is that this June,
Yeah.
I will be doing a quilting cruise to Alaska.
Oh my gosh, I saw that. Have you
And-
done that? Have you done quilting cruises before?
This will be the first one, and
Oh
I'm
my
so
gosh.
excited about it. And we're going, so basically the way it works is when the ship is at port, you get to get off with your friends and go to all the things, at the port
Yeah.
and see all the things in Alaska. And there are 3 days when the ship is at sea. And so those are the days when we actually do the quilting.
Uh-huh.
And the project that we're working on is called Northern Star Garden, and it involves 3 different techniques. The first one is sewing together some flower shapes with AccuQuilt pieces that have already been cut out, including half square triangles.
Nice.
And there's a lot of flowers in Alaska that are very beautiful, so that's where that element came from. And then in the center, there's a paper-pieced mariner's compass for like the northern lights and the northern stars.
Uh-huh.
And then in the border, there are some snowflakes that are going to be done with like the Hawaiian applique technique.
Fabulous. And if people are listening and they want to sign up for the cruise, where do they go?
They can find the information on my website, or they could also go to the travel agent, which would be called Quilt Retreat at Sea.
Mm-hmm.
So quiltretreatatsea.com. And then my particular cruise is called Quilting in the Wild.
Nice.
And it's June 6th to the 13th of 2020.
Nice. Well, that sounds like loads of fun. You're going to have to come back and talk to us about how things go with the fabric line and also the cruise. I think it'd be really awesome. And where was did you get to go to their archive for the fabric company?
No, the employees from QT Fabrics went into the archives, but then they sent me pictures of like what they found, and I could say,
cool.
I like that one, I like that one,
Yeah.
don't like that one.
Lovely. So lovely. I love it. Oh, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And do you need to review it before I post?
No, it'll be fine.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Fabulous. Well, I will let you know when we post. And that's it. I'm going to turn off the recording.
Thank you.
So you've been listening to JustWannaQuilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. And I'm Elizabeth Townsend Gard. If you like this podcast, keep listening. Also, we have a Facebook group. Come join us. We talk about a lot of things. We also have an Instagram account. And of course, most importantly, I really hope you get a chance to quilt today.